Sometimes the most devastating crimes happen to those who seem destined for greatness.
Do you know what she said to her dad when she made that call to him?
She said, "Daddy, they have me and they want $75,000.
Did she say who they?
She did not say who they were.
In the spring of 1981, an 18-year-old honors student stood on the precipice of everything she had worked for. Graduation was weeks away. College applications submitted. Dreams mapped out with the precision of someone who believed tomorrow was guaranteed.
I was at the club, and it was fairly late, 12 or 1 o'clock at night. And there was a phone call, and it was Jamey. And I was a little bit alarmed because she wouldn't usually be calling me at that time of night. They only allowed her to say a couple words to me. And then whoever it was, they said a few words, just told me that they had her and they would call me back.
Her name was Jamey Walker, and she was about to become the first Black prom queen in her high school's history. But in Las Vegas, Nevada, being a trailblazer came with its own set of dangers. What happened to Jamey in the early morning hours of May 9th, 1981, would shatter not just her family, but an entire community that had watched her rise. This is the story of a case that went cold for 35 years, a mother who refused to give up, and the DNA evidence that finally brought a killer to justice. But first, you need to understand who Jamey Walker was, and why someone wanted her dead. In 1981, West Las Vegas wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a fortress of Black excellence built out of necessity. When segregation forced the African American community to create their own spaces, they didn't just survive, they thrived. At the heart of this community stood the Walker family, pillars of civil rights activism and business success. Jamey's mother, Eleanor, served as president of the local NAACP chapter, fighting battles that would shape Las Vegas for generations. Her father, James, owned the People's Choice, a restaurant that doubled as a community meeting place where politics and possibility filled the air along with the aroma of home cooking. Growing up in this environment, Jamey absorbed lessons about leadership, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. But she was also just a teenager, laughing with friends, cheering at football games, and navigating the complex world of high school relationships. At Ed W. Clark High School, Jamey didn't just participate, she dominated. Student council member, head cheerleader, and soon-to-be prom queen, she collected achievements like other students collected homework assignments. Yet those who knew her best described someone remarkably grounded, always willing to lift others up rather than looking down from her elevated position. But success, especially for a young Black woman in 1981 Las Vegas, painted a target on her back that she couldn't have imagined. Friday, May 8, 1981, started like any other spring evening in Las Vegas. The desert air was warm, promising another beautiful weekend. Jamey had plans, a date with a young man she'd been seeing, followed by what should have been a quiet night at home before another busy day of senior year activities. The date went as expected. Dinner, conversation, the comfortable routine of young romance in a city where the lights never dimmed. Her companion would later tell police that nothing seemed unusual when he dropped her off at her family's home in West Las Vegas shortly after midnight. Jamey appeared tired but content, ready to end the evening and prepare for whatever Saturday would bring. But Saturday would never come for Jamey Walker. What happened next remains partially shrouded in mystery, but the brutal facts emerged piece by piece. Sometime in those dark hours between Friday night and Saturday morning, someone entered the Walker home. There were no signs of forced entry, no sounds of struggle loud enough to wake the neighbors. Whoever took Jamey knew exactly what they were doing. Hours later, as James Walker went about his morning routine at the People's Choice restaurant, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, deliberate, and absolutely terrifying. "We have your daughter. If you want to see her alive again, you'll need $75,000 in cash." The caller's demands were specific and chilling. No police, no delays. And disturbingly, the kidnapper seemed to know intimate details about the Walker family's finances, including James's Mercedes-Benz and Eleanor's personal relationships. The DNA evidence that would eventually solve this case was collected from Jamey's underwear, but in 1981, forensic technology couldn't unlock its secrets. For now, the family could only wait and hope. But this wasn't just a random kidnapping for ransom. The second call revealed something even more sinister. A different voice, also identifying as a black male, suggested that perhaps Eleanor's boyfriend could provide the ransom money. These weren't strangers making lucky guesses. Someone was watching the Walker family, studying their lives, and planning something unthinkable. The third call would haunt the family forever. Jamey's brother answered the phone and heard something that gave them hope and broke their hearts simultaneously. His sister's voice, brief but unmistakably alive, saying she was okay. Then the kidnapper returned to the line with words that made no sense. They had taken the wrong person. Jamey had been kidnapped by mistake. The real target was supposed to be Eleanor's boyfriend, and Jamey would be returned unharmed. For a few precious hours, the Walker family allowed themselves to believe this nightmare might end with their daughter walking through the front door. They were wrong. 1981 began with the kind of crystal-clear desert morning that makes Las Vegas feel like paradise. 2 Marine Corps sergeants were conducting routine military exercises in the remote wilderness of Lake Mead National Recreation Area when they stumbled upon something that would shatter that illusion forever. Beneath a bridge off Lakeshore Road, approximately 50 feet below the roadway, lay the body of a young woman. The Marines immediately contacted park rangers, who in turn called Las Vegas Metropolitan Police. What they found would transform a kidnapping case into a murder investigation. Jamey Walker had died from massive skull fractures sustained from the nearly 50-foot fall from the bridge. Whether she was conscious when she was pushed or thrown, investigators couldn't determine. What was clear was that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide her body in one of the most remote areas accessible by vehicle in southern Nevada. The location told a story of premeditation and desperation. This wasn't a crime of passion or a kidnapping gone wrong. This was calculated murder. Someone had driven Jamey's body to this isolated bridge, ensured no witnesses were present, and disposed of her in a way they believed would prevent discovery. But they had made a critical error. The Lake Mead area, despite its vastness, was regularly patrolled by Park Service personnel and frequented by military training exercises. The body was discovered within 48 hours of Jamey's disappearance, preserving crucial evidence that would prove vital decades later. As news of the discovery spread through West Las Vegas, the community that had watched Jamey grow up struggled to comprehend the loss. This wasn't just the murder of a promising young woman. It was an attack on everything the neighborhood represented. If someone could kill Jamey Walker, protected by family prominence, community love, and her own careful nature, then no one was safe. Eleanor Walker's initial shock quickly transformed into something more dangerous: maternal fury combined with activist instincts. From the moment she learned of her daughter's death, Eleanor began her own investigation. She had suspects in mind, theories about motives, and an unshakable belief that justice was not just possible, but inevitable. At the top of her list was a name that would haunt the family for the next 35 years: Willie Shannon. Shannon was a professional boxer with a troubled past who had recently entered the family's orbit through Eleanor's son. Standing nearly 6 feet tall and weighing 180 pounds, Shannon was hard to miss, and impossible to forget once Eleanor noticed his unsettling behavior around her daughter. Eleanor would later recall specific incidents that had raised red flags: Shannon's derogatory comments about Jamey, his claims to be protecting her from other men, and a strange visit to the Walker home on the very day Jamey disappeared. He had claimed to need Eleanor's signature on insurance papers, but the visit was brief and felt wrong in ways Eleanor couldn't articulate at the time. After Jamey's murder, those instincts crystallized into certainty. Detective work in 1981 relied heavily on shoe leather, intuition, and old-fashioned interrogation techniques. When Las Vegas Metropolitan Police brought Willie Shannon in for questioning just days after Jamey's body was discovered, they had Eleanor Walker's suspicions, a few circumstantial connections, and hope that pressure might crack a guilty conscience. Shannon arrived at the police station with the confidence of someone who had nothing to hide, or everything to gain by appearing that way. When questioned about his whereabouts during the time of Jamey's disappearance, Shannon claimed he was busy training for an upcoming boxing match. His alibi was simple, verifiable, and delivered without hesitation. But Eleanor's instincts weren't built on alibi timing or boxing schedules. She had observed Shannon's behavior, noted his inappropriate comments about her daughter, and felt the chill of recognition when she learned the details of Jamey's kidnapping. The ransom callers had known too much about the Walker family's personal business, the kind of intimate details that come from watching, listening, and planning. However, instincts and evidence are different currencies in the criminal justice system. Fingerprints collected from the abduction scene didn't match Shannon's prints on file with Metro Police. Without physical evidence linking him to the crime scene, without eyewitnesses placing him at the Walker home, and without concrete proof that his boxing training alibi was fabricated, detectives had no choice but to release him. For Eleanor Walker, watching Shannon walk away from the police station was like witnessing justice die. She knew, with the certainty that only a mother's intuition can provide, that her daughter's killer was returning to his normal life while Jamey lay in a morgue, her dreams buried with her body. But Eleanor hadn't spent years fighting civil rights battles in Las Vegas to surrender when the stakes were highest. If the police couldn't build a case against Shannon in 1981, she would wait. She would watch. She would remember every detail and preserve every piece of evidence until technology and tenacity could finally align. The investigation officially remained open, but resources shifted to other cases as leads dried up and months passed without breakthrough developments. Police believed there were additional suspects beyond Shannon, but without concrete evidence linking anyone to the crime, the case began its slow descent into the cold case files. For the Walker family, however, the case never went cold. Eleanor maintained detailed records of her suspicions, continued gathering information about Shannon's activities, and refused to let investigators forget about Jamey's murder. She attended community meetings, spoke at civil rights gatherings, and turned her daughter's case into a symbol of justice delayed but not denied. Years turned into decades. Shannon moved to Florida and continued his boxing career, eventually serving time in prison on an unrelated murder charge. Eleanor aged, battled health problems, and watched Las Vegas transform around her while her daughter's killer remained free. But science was evolving, and with it, the possibility that evidence preserved from 1981 might finally reveal its secrets. By 2010, DNA analysis had revolutionized criminal investigations in ways that seemed like science fiction to the detectives who had first worked Jamey Walker's case. What once required fresh samples and perfect preservation could now extract genetic profiles from evidence that had been stored in police warehouses for decades. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police had never officially closed Jamey's case, and advances in forensic technology provided new opportunities to examine old evidence with fresh eyes. On November 3, 2010, forensic scientists working on the case made a discovery that would change everything. Semen found on Walker's underwear contained DNA that could finally be analyzed. The process of connecting that DNA to a suspect required patience, legal maneuvering, and a bit of luck. Willie Shannon was serving time in a Florida prison on an unrelated murder charge, which provided investigators with the legal authority to collect a DNA sample for comparison. When the results came back, Eleanor Walker's 30-year quest for justice was finally validated. The DNA found on her daughter's underwear matched Willie Shannon's genetic profile with the kind of scientific certainty that removes all reasonable doubt. On December 7, 2010, Shannon was arrested at the Manatee County Jail in Palmetto, Florida, and charged with Jamey Walker's murder. He was being held on a murder charge and faced extradition to Las Vegas. For Eleanor, then in her 70s and battling health problems, the news represented both triumph and tragedy. Justice was finally within reach, but it had taken 30 years to arrive. Shannon fought extradition, delaying his return to Las Vegas and prolonging the family's wait for closure. Legal battles stretched months into years as defense attorneys challenged the evidence, questioned the DNA analysis, and attempted to prevent their client from facing Nevada's justice system. But scientific evidence has a way of cutting through legal maneuvering. The DNA match was irrefutable, the chain of custody was solid, and the case that had seemed impossible to prove in 1981 was now bulletproof in 2010. When Shannon was finally returned to Las Vegas to stand trial, he faced not just a murder charge, but the accumulated weight of 3 decades of grief, community anger, and a mother's unwavering belief in justice. Eleanor Walker, now in her 70s, had lived to see her instincts validated, and her daughter's killer finally held accountable. Or so she hoped. The legal system that had failed Jamey in 1981 was about to test the Walker family's faith in justice one more time. Shannon's defense team had their own strategy, and it didn't involve admitting guilt or accepting responsibility for a crime that had devastated an entire community. Instead, they would pursue a legal maneuver that would allow Shannon to avoid trial while maintaining his innocence. A compromise that would leave many questioning whether justice had truly been served. Eleanor Walker had devoted 32 years of her life to ensuring her daughter's killer faced justice. She had battled police indifference, technological limitations, and the simple passage of time that makes witnesses forget and evidence deteriorate. By 2013, as Willie Shannon's trial approached, Eleanor was finally going to see the man she had always believed was responsible face a jury of his peers. But Eleanor Walker would never see that day. In October 2013, on the day she was scheduled to be deposed for Shannon's trial, Eleanor died. The woman who had transformed her grief into activism, who had refused to let investigators forget about Jamey's case, who had lived long enough to see DNA evidence vindicate her instincts, passed away just months before the trial that would determine her daughter's killer's fate. For the Walker family, Eleanor's death represented a cruel final twist in a case that had already demanded too much sacrifice. The woman who had fought hardest for justice would never witness its delivery. When Willie Shannon's case finally reached resolution in January 2016, it came in a form that many found deeply unsatisfying. Shannon, now 64 years old, accepted a plea deal that allowed him to plead guilty to second-degree murder while maintaining his innocence. This type of agreement, known as an Alford plea, permits defendants to acknowledge that prosecutors likely have enough evidence for conviction without admitting actual guilt. Shannon was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but with credit for time already served while awaiting trial, his actual sentence was reduced to 10 years, making him eligible for parole almost immediately. For many observers, the sentence seemed inadequate for a crime that had stolen not just Jamey's life, but also decades of her family's peace. A brutal kidnapping and murder that had traumatized an entire community was resolved with a legal technicality that allowed the perpetrator to avoid both a trial and an admission of guilt. However, prosecutors defended the plea agreement, arguing that after 35 years, securing a conviction at trial remained uncertain despite the DNA evidence. Witnesses had died, memories had faded, and the legal system that had failed to solve the case in 1981 might fail again in 2016. The compromise provided closure of a sort. Shannon was finally held accountable for his actions, even if that accountability came with caveats that diminished its impact. For the Walker family, the plea represented bittersweet vindication. Eleanor's instincts had been correct, her suspicions justified, and her decades-long quest for justice ultimately successful. But the resolution came too late for the woman who had fought hardest for it, and the punishment seemed inadequate for the crime that had shattered so many lives. Today, more than 4 decades after Jamey Walker's murder, her story serves as both a testament to a mother's love and a cautionary tale about justice delayed. Jamey Walker was 18 years old when she died, just weeks away from graduation and the beginning of what should have been a remarkable adult life. She had been elected prom queen, accepted to college, and positioned to continue her family's tradition of community leadership and civil rights activism. Her murder didn't just end her life, it eliminated the contributions she might have made to Las Vegas and beyond. The Alford plea that resolved his case left fundamental questions unanswered about motive, accomplices, and the specific circumstances of Jamey's final hours. Jamey Walker's story reminds us that behind every cold case statistic is a family that continues to grieve, a community that remembers loss and dreams